Hello everyone, this is Anshu Bamney. I'll be talking about a project titled Comprehensive Analysis of Factors Influencing Pedestrian Injury Severity at Intersection and Non-Intersection Locations in Connecticut. This project was funded by New England University Transportation Center. This is the overview of my presentation. I'll walk you through from introduction to literature review, research objectives, data, methodology, results and discussion, and finally, we'll wrap up with conclusions and recommendations. Starting off, so in the year 2022, in the US, more than 7,500 pedestrians died on road, and this was a 30-year high. And in the following year, in 2023, 7,300 pedestrians died on the road. And Connecticut followed the suit, and where we can see that in the year 2022, um, there was a jump in pedestrian fatalities by 40%, and that is really, really high. And this is just a map of Connecticut to show where Connecticut is located. Now, historically, pedestrian injury severity or pedestrian crashes have been a point of concern, and a lot of research has been done on it. And there are factors, there are researchers that have identified the factors that have influenced pedestrian injury severity. And some of the pedestrian characteristics were found to affect them. So, for example, the higher the pedestrian age, they are more likely to suffer more severe injuries. And then pedestrian impairment was also one of the factors, like it affects pedestrian perception and decision making, and ultimately it affects the pedestrian injury severity. Similarly, driver characteristics like speeding and driver impairment were linked to pedestrian severe injuries and pedestrian fatalities. So all of these are some behavioral factors or some human factors related factors. But it also matters where the crash has happened, and that shapes how severe it can get. So talking about that, there are a lot of research where they have studied some roadway and environmental factors, basically telling us where and when crash has happened and how it turns severe given the locations. So lightning conditions, for example, the dark roads or poor street lightings were associated with higher nighttime injury severity crashes, and then higher roadway speeds or the functional classes that carry high speed vehicles were associated with higher pedestrian injury severity. And that makes sense as well, because that increases the kinetic energy through which a vehicle hits a pedestrian. The gradient and alignment or the shape of the road that affects operating speed and ultimately increases crash energy were also associated with higher severity risk. So far, we understand that the context of the roadway environmental factors matter, but context also affects pedestrian injury severity. And what is a better contrast than context like intersection versus non-intersection locations? And here we'll see that in a little bit greater detail. So, intersection and non-intersection locations are fundamentally different from each other, and they are like two fundamentally different environments. So, for example, there is traffic control. So, for example, at intersections, there are signals and signs that manage conflicts, and at non-intersections, there are fewer or no traffic control devices. Conflict patterns also differ between the two locations. So, for example, at intersections, turning movements, complex paths are there, and at non-intersections, straight through movements or mid-block crossings are there. And operating speeds, so at intersections, we have a relatively lower speed, and then the speeds are also a little bit controlled as they are approaching the intersections, whereas at non-intersections, the speeds are relatively higher. So basically, this is just telling us that intersections and non-intersections are two fundamentally different locations, and they have to be studied different or separately. So talking about the research gap, the existing literature basically has sufficient information about the pedestrian driver characteristic, roadway, and environmental factors that affect pedestrian injury severity. But there are few studies that compare the intersection and non-intersection environments directly, or study intersection and non-intersection crashes using the same data. And then one of the gap is that the fatal and serious injury, that is K and A injuries, are collapsed into one single category, and it is called as severe class. And then these are analyzed together. We understand why these are combined because a lot of times fatal injury crashes are relatively less, and to overcome that, these two categories are clubbed together. But the problem is that within severe crashes, we do not know how fatality differs from serious injury crashes. So basically, survivability in a severe injury crash is overlooked. And to overcome this, we developed a two-stage framework models that deals with severity escalation first, and then fatality differentiation in two separate contexts. So basically, we did this for intersections and non-intersections. And for severity escalation, we worked with multinomial logit models, and then for fatality differentiation, we worked with just K and A. So we basically just did analysis K versus A type of injuries. And we'll see that in the upcoming slides. So given our research gap, we came up with two objectives. The first one is examine pedestrian injury severity factors. So here we are just going to examine the factors associated with pedestrian injury severity across intersections and non-intersection locations separately. So here we are basically developing multinomial logit models where K and A is put into one category, B and C level of injury is clubbed into one, and then these are compared with no injury or O level injury. And then the second objective is differentiate between fatal and serious injury. So we basically are here testing the survivability. Here the aim is to identify factors that differentiate A versus suspected serious injury outcome within the severe injury category to provide a deeper insight into the survivability of pedestrians. So for the purpose of this study, we used data from 2015 to 2023, the statewide crash data of Connecticut, and we used the Connecticut crash data repository. We also used NHTSA's VIN decoder database, and we also used a Canadian Vehicle Specification database. So we clubbed them together, and within a particular database, we also use some unique IDs to join the data together. So once we integrate all of this, we were ready for analysis. And this slide basically tells you how we developed our database. So first of all, we had the Connecticut crash repository data. So we had the person level information, and then from there we separated the pedestrians, and with each ID of that we integrated crash data and then the vehicle data and then the driver data as well. So once we integrated all of that with the help of the VIN numbers that was there in the vehicle information of the CTCDR, we joined the NHTSA's VIN directory data, and then we pulled all the information from there, and with the help of that, we joined it with the Canadian Vehicle Specification database. Once that is joined, we basically move to the next step, that is clean and merge it together and see for any missing information. If there is any missing information, we remove that missing information, and at the end, we splitted our dataset into two parts, that is intersection and non-intersection locations. So ultimately, for our research paper or our project, intersection locations had 3,806 observations, and for the severe cases, we had, that is KNA, we had 653 observations. At non-intersection locations, we have 5,600 observations, and for severe crashes, that is KNA, we had approximately 1,200 observations. Okay. So the stage one, we developed multinomial logit models, and this is going to tell us what escalates severity. So here, no injury crash is the baseline, and non-severe, that is B and C, is one category, and then severe, K plus A, is a category that is going to tell us whether this crash is severe or not. Then in the stage two, we developed binary logist model where we are just working with K and A subset. Okay. So K and A is basically fatality and then suspected serious injury, where suspected serious injury became our baseline. It was 0 and then K was 1. So this is how we developed our model. So for example, for multinomial, we developed it for both intersection and non-intersection, and binary logit, we did it same for intersection and non-intersection. So ultimately, we developed 4 models in total, and 2 for, of course, intersection, and 2 for non-intersection. So here are our model results for intersection analysis, and here we can see that the pedestrian age is associated with higher levels of severity. As you can see through the multinomial logit models, it is also coming out as a significant factor in binary logit models. What this tells is that basically higher pedestrian age or old age pedestrians are associated with severe injury, and they are also associated with fatality. So this increases basically both severity and fatality. Then pedestrian impairment. So the pedestrian impairment is associated with, again, severe injury, but here you can see that within severe injury, that is in the last column in the binary logit model, we can see that this factor was not significant in this, meaning that it affects only severity, but it does not differentiate whether this crash is going to be a fatality or a serious injury. Then driver speeding. Here we can see that the coefficient is significant in both the severe category and also in the fatal category, indicating that the higher driver speeds are associated with severity, and within severity also higher driver speeds are associated with fatality. This makes speeding one of the really strong factors that affect pedestrian injury severities at intersection locations. Then dark lighted situations, surprisingly, this came up as positive in the multinomial logit models. This is basically telling us that this is basically capturing for the pedestrian exposure. So we'll put the street lights on those locations, or we'll light up those locations where we can expect more pedestrians. This might be capturing for that. And interestingly, this came up as a factor that governs severity, but this was a factor that was not governing fatality. So this was kind of interesting to see that it is going to govern only severity, but it is not a differentiator between a fatality and a severe injury or a serious injury. Then active and passive traffic control device. This was interesting. So a passive and active traffic control device, you can see that these are not significant predictors of severity in multinomial logit models, but they tend to reduce the pedestrian fatality in the binary logit models. This basically tells us that these devices may not protect from severity, but this can be, or this is a strong mechanism to prevent fatalities given our data set or given our analysis. And then the other type of intersections, like the Y intersections or roundabouts, were associated with higher levels of severity. And then lastly, the vehicle age and the bumper height were associated again with higher levels of severity. And this makes sense as well, because the higher the bumper height, there is a chance that the driver might not be able to see them, or the higher the front bumper height, there is a good chance that the pedestrian, if hit, would lead to a severe kind of injury. And then vehicle age can tell us the wear and tear of the vehicle, and this can affect the levels of severity. This chart is basically telling us the odds ratios for different factors or key factors that were found to affect the severity among pedestrians at intersections. And on x-axis, we can see the odds ratio, and on y-axis, we can see different kind of factors. You can see that the top one is the driver speeding, followed by impairment and non-standard intersection types. and then followed by others. One quick thing, the last two factors, the vehicle age and pedestrian age, are continuous numbers. So the number or the odds ratio might seem small, but if we just go with the average pedestrian age or the average vehicle age, we can see that is quite significant. So, for example, a vehicle that is 10 years old, that was kind of the average vehicle age, was associated with a 28% odds of getting engaged in a pedestrian severe injury crash, that is K&A combined. So that is quite significant number. Now, in this chart, we can see the intersection fatality analysis, that is K versus A. On x-axis, again, the odds ratios are there. On y-axis, we are seeing different key factors. We need to note that this is for only fatality, that is K versus A analysis. And here also, the driver speeding came up as a strong factor, and followed by pedestrian age. Then we can see that the active traffic control and the passive traffic control were associated with lower odds of engaging or getting engaged into a pedestrian severity. So basically, these last two are predictors. Ultimately, speed is constant, and the traffic control devices are basically going to protect. It does not prevent severe crash, but it cuts the likelihood of fatal odds by 40 to 80%. That is kind of huge. Similarly, we developed models for non-intersection locations, and the pedestrian age again came up as a strong predictor, followed by pedestrian impairment. There are some pedestrian actions, for example, crossing the roadway, the pedestrian were in the roadway, or any kind of pedestrian improper action like jaywalking. All of these were associated with severity and to some level the fatality as well within the severe category. So that makes a huge difference. So basically, these all are covering for the pedestrian exposure. That's what these vehicles are capturing for. And then driver speeding, it was a significant predictor for severity, but it was not going to differentiate between K versus A. So that was a little bit surprising. Then driver impairment again came up as a strong predictor, and this definitely makes sense because the driver, if impaired, they might not be able to judge the risk that are there to pedestrians. There is a huge possibility for that. Now, the upgradient or the roadway related factors, then the lighting related factors were associated again with the severity and to fatalities as well. The other roadway related factors like the interstate or the state roads were associated with higher levels of severity and fatality. So interstate, we were also surprised by interstate because pedestrians are not allowed on interstates, but this might be capturing the areas that are very close to interstates. Not exactly this is happening on an interstate, but this might be just the areas very close to interstates. So ultimately, this is just simply telling us that the high speed roads or the roads that have higher free flow traffic might be associated with a higher likelihood of severe pedestrian injuries or fatalities. And then right shoulder width also was associated with pedestrian fatalities within the severe category. And then vehicle age and bumper height were associated with, again, higher levels of severity and fatality. Lastly, the pandemic, we tested for post-pandemic, and post-pandemic era was associated again with pedestrian severity at non-intersection locations. So these are some of the key factors that are associated with higher chances of pedestrian severity. On the x-axis, you can see the odds ratio, and y, we can see the key factors. Ultimately, we are seeing pedestrian impairment, speeding, and then roadway related factors and pedestrian exposure factors like crossing the roadway, improper actions. Here in this chart, we can see the results for K versus A, that is within severe category. We are seeing these results. Also, we can see some of the factors like upgradient, left alignment, interstate road, state road. So basically, this is telling us the improper actions of pedestrians. So this all is telling us that roadway features and the pedestrian actions or pedestrian exposure kind of govern the fatalities within the severe category. So ultimately, the conclusions and what we came up with is that at intersections, speeding is the main concern, and it raises both the chances of severe injury and fatal at intersections. Here, the traffic control device, whether active or passive, does not stop severe crashes to happen, but it helps pedestrian to survive them. At non-intersections, what we found is that the pedestrian exposure matters the most. So, for example, crossing the roadway or walking along the busier road or high-speed roads increases the chances of severe injury. Whether a severe crash becomes fatal depends more on the roadway geometry and the darkness and impairment related factors. In the two contexts, we clearly understood that there are different factors that affect the severity in both. And then there are some factors that are associated uh, in both. So, for example, pedestrian impairment, older age of pedestrians, poor lighting condition increases the risk in both environments. But the dominant factors changes with the environment. As these two environments are different, the strategy to improve pedestrian safety would change as per the location across the state. Now, the recommendations at intersections, we can manage speed. That can be our priority, and it should be in line with the safe system approach. We can also strengthen traffic control, even if they cannot prevent crash, but it helps pedestrians to survive one. That is kind of very important. At non-intersections, we can make the crossing safer by providing refuge, medians, RRFBs, or lighting, and we can pay attention to the roadway geometry that are especially associated with severe or fatal injuries, especially on grades and curves. We can work on these. So across all locations, the recommendation is that we can improve the lighting on high-risk corridors and address impairments through any sort of enforcement of safe late-night travel options, if there are any, that should be done. Then we should follow the safe system approach and move forward with develop more forgiving roads that can accommodate for driving error or any kind of pedestrian error. These are the references for this study. This study is supported by New England UTC, and I would like to thank Connecticut Department of Transportation, University of Connecticut, and most importantly, Connecticut Transportation Safety Research Center.